the soul aches, because eternity whispers. The Path to Allah is more than a book. It's a journey from heedlessness to divine light. Through 38 soul-stirring chapters, Edwin Kajgana reveals the essence of true servitude, drawing from timeless Islamic wisdom to awaken the heart. Discover the sweetness of faith, the mercy in trials, and the power of surrender. Are you ready to walk the path back to Him? The Path to Allah, available on Amazon.
Beyond East and West, the philosophical convergences of Nietzsche and Islamic mysticism, the shared critique of decadent traditions, Friedrich Nietzsche and Islamic thought converge in their profound critique of what they perceive as life-denying traditions that have corrupted the human spirit. Both traditions call for a return to more authentic forms of existence, though they arrive at this conclusion through different paths. Nietzsche launched his famous attack on what he termed slave morality, particularly as it manifested in Christianity. He saw Christian values as promoting weakness, guilt, and other worldliness that prevented humans from reaching their full potential. Similarly, Islamic reformers and mystics have consistently criticized what they view as corrupted forms of religious practice that emphasize blind following rather than genuine spiritual engagement. The early 20th century Arab intellectual tradition embraced Nietzsche precisely because his critique of European decadence resonated with their own concerns about the stagnation of Islamic civilization. Muslim modernist scholars believed that parts of the Islamic world had returned to a state of spiritual emptiness and moral decline, requiring radical renewal. This shared diagnostic approach created unexpected common ground between Nietzschean philosophy and Islamic reform thought. Both traditions reject the idea that suffering should be passively accepted or that weakness should be celebrated as virtue. Nietzsche condemned what he saw as Christianity's glorification of meekness and self-denial, while Islamic thought emphasizes the importance of striving and struggle in the path of self-improvement. The Quranic concept of striving for excellence finds echo in Nietzsche's call for human beings to overcome their limitations and reach toward greatness, the will to power, and the concept of jihad. One of the most striking parallels between Nietzschean philosophy and Islamic thought lies in their understanding of struggle as fundamental to human existence and growth. Nietzsche's concept of will to power finds remarkable resonance in the Islamic understanding of jihad, particularly in its spiritual dimension. The will to power, as Nietzsche conceived it, is not merely about domination over others, but represents the fundamental drive towards self-mastery and self-overcoming. This internal struggle for excellence mirrors what Islamic tradition calls al-jihad al-akbar, or the greater jihad, the struggle against the lower self or nafs. Both concepts recognize that the most important battles are fought within the human soul rather than in external conflicts. Islamic mystical literature describes the nafs as having different levels, from the commanding soul that follows base desires to the tranquil soul that achieves harmony with divine will. This progression requires constant vigilance and effort, much like Nietzsche's vision of the individual who must continually overcome their limitations to become who they truly are. The spiritual jihad involves purification of the mind, body, and heart, and represents a pattern of increasingly conscious recognition of one's condition. Nietzsche wrote about the necessity of self-overcoming, stating that humans must go beyond their current state to realize their potential. This echoes the Islamic concept of spiritual jihad as described in the Quran. And those who strive for us, we will surely guide them to our ways. Both traditions see struggle not as something to be avoided, but as the very mechanism through which growth and spiritual development occur. The parallel extends to their understanding of the nature of this struggle. Neither tradition sees it as a one-time achievement, but as an ongoing process that requires constant attention and effort. The person engaged in spiritual jihad may fluctuate between grades of the nafs, just as Nietzsche's individual must continually work to maintain their achievements in self-overcoming, self-transcendence, and the annihilation of the ego. Perhaps nowhere do Nietzsche and Islamic mysticism converge more dramatically than in their understanding of ego transcendence, though they approach this concept from different philosophical foundations. Nietzsche's vision of self-overcoming and the Islamic mystical concept of fana, annihilation, both require the dissolution of ordinary self-consciousness to achieve a higher state of being. Fana in Islamic mysticism represents the complete denial of self and the realization of God, and is described as the point where the mystic loses himself in the love of God and annihilates his individual will. This mystical state involves the complete abandonment of ego consciousness in favor of divine consciousness. The Sufi tradition teaches that true spiritual realization requires the seeker to die before one dies, meaning the psychological death of the ego while still living. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming similarly requires the individual to move beyond conventional notions of selfhood. His vision of the person who achieves greatness involves transcending ordinary human limitations and societal conditioning. The person who embodies Nietzsche's ideal has overcome the small self that is bound by resentment, fear, and conventional morality. Both traditions recognize that this transcendence is not a comfortable or easy process. The Islamic mystic must endure what the tradition calls spiritual struggle, often involving intense psychological and spiritual trials. Nietzsche likewise acknowledged that becoming who one truly is requires facing difficult truths about oneself and society, often leading to isolation and misunderstanding. The state that follows this transcendence also shows remarkable parallels. In Islamic mysticism, after fana comes baka or subsistence in God, where the mystic continues to exist but now as a transparent vessel for divine will rather than as an independent ego. Similarly, Nietzsche envisioned individuals who had overcome themselves as being able to create new values and ways of being, no longer bound by the reactive patterns of conventional morality, the perfect human and the Superman. The philosophical visions of human perfection in both traditions reveal surprising convergences despite their different theological foundations. The Islamic concept of al-Insan al-Kamil, the perfect human, and Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, Superman, both represent ideals of human potential that transcend ordinary limitations. The perfect human in Islamic thought, as developed by figures like Ibn Arabi, represents the human being who has realized all divine attributes within themselves while maintaining their human nature. This individual serves as a bridge between the divine and created worlds, embodying the highest possibilities of human development. The perfect human is described as a polished mirror in which divine attributes are reflected, suggesting a state of complete transparency to higher reality. Nietzsche's Superman similarly represents a human type that has transcended conventional limitations and achieved a state of creative power and authentic existence. The Superman creates values rather than following inherited moral codes and represents the flowering of human potential freed from the constraints of slave morality and resentment. Both concepts emphasize the rarity of such achievement. The perfect human in Islamic thought is understood to be an exceptional individual who appears infrequently in human history, often identified with great prophets and saints. Similarly, Nietzsche saw his Superman as a future possibility rather than a common occurrence, representing what humanity might become rather than what it currently is. The key difference lies in their relationship to transcendence. The Islamic perfect human achieves perfection through complete alignment with divine will and surrender to God. Nietzsche's Superman, by contrast, represents human self-creation and the assertion of individual will in the absence of divine authority. Yet both visions share an understanding that ordinary human consciousness and conventional social existence represent only a fraction of human potential. Critique of conventional religion. Both Nietzsche and Islamic mystical tradition share a deep skepticism toward formalized institutional religion, though they express this critique in different ways and for different reasons. Their criticisms often focus on how religious institutions can become obstacles to genuine spiritual experience rather than facilitators of it. Nietzsche's critique of Christianity centered on what he saw as its life-denying character and its promotion of guilt, weakness, and otherworldly escapism. He argued that institutional Christianity had corrupted the original message and created a system that diminished rather than enhanced human potential. His famous declaration that God is dead was not merely atheistic, but represented a critique of how religious concepts had become empty of meaning and transformative power. Islamic mystical traditions have expressed similar concerns about the formalization of religious practice. Sufi masters have often criticized purely external observance that lacks inner spiritual reality. The great Islamic philosopher Al-Ghazali wrote extensively about the difference between true spiritual knowledge and mere intellectual or ritualistic religiosity. Many Sufi teachings emphasize that external religious forms, while important, can become obstacles to genuine spiritual realization if they are pursued without inner understanding. Both traditions recognize that authentic spiritual experience requires going beyond conventional religious boundaries. Nietzsche called for individuals to create their own values and meaning rather than accepting inherited religious doctrines. Islamic mysticism speaks of the importance of direct spiritual experience or kashf, unveiling, that goes beyond what can be learned through books or conventional religious education. The parallel extends to their understanding of religious authority. Nietzsche rejected the authority of religious institutions and called for individuals to become their own spiritual authorities. Similarly, while Islamic mysticism operates within the framework of Islamic law and doctrine, it emphasizes the importance of the direct relationship between the seeker and God, often bypassing conventional religious intermediaries in favor of direct spiritual guidance, affirmation of life and existence. Despite their different philosophical foundations, both Nietzschean philosophy and Islamic thought share a fundamental affirmation of existence and the material world, contrasting sharply with traditions that emphasize otherworldly escape or the denial of earthly life. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, or love of fate, represents his most complete expression of life affirmation. This principle calls for not merely accepting, but actively loving one's entire existence, including its suffering and difficulties. Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." Islamic thought, while recognizing the temporary nature of worldly existence, nevertheless affirms the created world as a manifestation of divine beauty and wisdom. The Quranic teaching that God created all things in due proportion and declared creation very good provides a theological foundation for affirming earthly existence. Islamic mysticism speaks of seeing divine attributes reflected in creation rather than seeking to escape from the material world entirely. Both traditions reject purely ascetic approaches that deny the value of embodied existence. Nietzsche criticized what he saw as life-denying religious attitudes that sought escape from the body and the world. Similarly, while Islamic mysticism includes ascetic elements, Its highest teachings often involve returning to the world after spiritual realization to serve creation as a manifestation of divine compassion. The concept of eternal recurrence in Nietzsche's philosophy provides another point of convergence. The idea that one should live as if every moment would repeat infinitely reflects a radical acceptance and affirmation of existence. Islamic thought contains similar teachings about the cyclical nature of spiritual development and the importance of embracing each moment as an opportunity for spiritual growth and service. The critique of false consolation. Both philosophical traditions share a rejection of what they perceive as false consolations that prevent individuals from facing reality directly and achieving authentic transformation. This critique extends to religious and philosophical systems that offer easy comfort rather than challenging individuals to grow. Nietzsche condemned what he called idealism when it served as a means of avoiding difficult truths about existence. He argued that systems of thought that promised easy solutions or comfortable beliefs actually weakened individuals by preventing them from developing the strength to face life's challenges directly. His critique of slave morality included the observation that it often functioned as a psychological defense mechanism that allowed the weak to avoid confronting their limitations. Islamic mystical literature contains similar warnings about spiritual bypassing and false religious consolation. The tradition speaks of the difference between true spiritual states and mere emotional experiences that might feel pleasant but do not lead to genuine transformation. Sufi masters have often warned against seeking spiritual experiences for their own sake rather than as means toward genuine self-knowledge and divine realization. Both traditions emphasize that authentic spiritual development requires facing uncomfortable truths about oneself and one's situation. The Islamic concept of muhasabah, self-accounting, involves honest self-examination that can be psychologically demanding. Similarly, Nietzsche's call for individuals to become who you are requires confronting illusions about oneself and society that might be comforting but ultimately limiting. This shared emphasis on psychological honesty extends to their understanding of suffering. Neither tradition suggests that suffering should be sought for its own sake, but both recognize that attempting to avoid all discomfort often prevents the kind of growth that leads to genuine freedom and fulfillment. The path beyond conventional morality. One of the most significant convergences between Nietzschean philosophy and Islamic mystical thought lies in their recognition that authentic spiritual development requires moving beyond conventional moral categories, though they understand this transcendence differently. Nietzsche's famous phrase, beyond good and evil, does not advocate for immorality, but rather points toward a way of being that transcends reactive moral judgments based on resentment or social conditioning. The individual who achieves this state acts from authentic creative impulses rather than from inherited moral rules or social expectations. This person creates values rather than merely following them. Islamic mysticism contains similar teachings about transcending conventional religious categories through direct spiritual realization. Advanced Sufi teachings speak of states where ordinary religious obligations are fulfilled spontaneously through inner realization rather than external compliance. The concept of the perfect human includes the idea of someone who embodies divine attributes so completely that their actions naturally align with divine will without the need for external constraint. Both traditions recognize that this transcendence of conventional morality is extremely rare and can easily be misunderstood. Nietzsche was careful to distinguish between his vision of creative individual ethics and mere license or self-indulgence. Similarly, Islamic mystical literature contains numerous warnings about the dangers of claiming spiritual transcendence without having achieved genuine inner transformation. The practical expression of this transcendence also shows similarities. Both traditions speak of individuals who act with complete authenticity and spontaneity while remaining beneficial to others. Nietzsche's noble individual and the Islamic perfect human both represent types of people whose very presence elevates and inspires others, not through preaching, but through embodying higher possibilities of human existence. This convergence represents perhaps the most subtle and sophisticated point of connection between these traditions, suggesting that both recognize a level of human development where external rules give way to inner wisdom, and where individual authenticity serves rather than contradicts the larger good of existence. Time, fate, and the greatest weight. The relationship between human action and the vastness of time is a question that lies at the heart of both Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy and Islamic theological thought. Both traditions grapple with the weight of individual choice, framing it within a perspective of eternity that elevates every moment to a matter of ultimate significance. While their models of eternity differ, one cyclical and the other linear, their shared purpose is to awaken the individual to a more intentional and authentic way of living, forcing a confrontation with the profound consequences of one's own existence. Nietzsche's most dramatic formulation of this idea is the concept of eternal recurrence, which he introduces not as a proven scientific fact, but as a haunting thought experiment. He asks the individual to imagine a demon appearing and revealing that this life, exactly as it has been lived, with every joy, every sorrow, every trivial thought, and every moment of profound insight, will be repeated in the same sequence for all eternity. Nietzsche called this the greatest weight, a revelation that would serve as the ultimate test of a person's spirit. Would this news crush them, forcing them to curse the endless repetition of their mistakes and suffering? Or would they be so well disposed to themselves and to life that they would desire nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation, answering the demon, "You are a God, and never have I heard anything more divine"? For Nietzsche, the ability to joyfully affirm the eternal repetition of one's own life without wishing to change a single detail was the highest expression of a life-affirming will. It was the complete embodiment of his principle of amor fati, or the love of one's fate, where one not only accepts, but actively embraces everything that has happened and will happen. This thought experiment was designed to be a powerful psychological tool, forcing a person to evaluate their life not as a series of disconnected moments, but as an eternal monument they are building with every choice. The question becomes, are you living a life that you would be willing to endure forever? Islamic thought approaches this same challenge of imbuing life with ultimate meaning through a different temporal structure, a single linear existence that begins at birth and concludes with a final day of judgment leading to an eternal state in the hereafter. In this view, life on earth is a test, a period of trial where every action, intention, and thought is recorded and will be weighed. The Quran frequently emphasizes that this worldly life is temporary and that the true, enduring life is to come. This belief in a final accountability serves a function remarkably similar to Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. It places an immense weight upon every choice, reminding the individual that their actions have consequences that ripple into eternity. The knowledge that one will have to answer for one's life creates a state of constant moral and spiritual attentiveness. It encourages a life lived with purpose, integrity, and an awareness of a divine presence that observes all things. This framework is not meant to be a source of constant fear, but rather a motivation for self-improvement and a way to orient one's life toward what is lasting and meaningful. The Muslim thinker Muhammad Iqbal, who engaged deeply with Nietzsche's work, provides a bridge between these two perspectives. Iqbal respected Nietzsche's call for human strength and self-overcoming, but ultimately rejected the idea of eternal recurrence. He argued that a purely cyclical and deterministic repetition of the same events would negate human creativity and freedom, trapping the spirit in a meaningless loop. For Iqbal, the Islamic concept of time as a linear, forward-moving process was superior because it allowed for genuine novelty and the creative evolution of the self. The individual was not simply repeating a pre-written script, but was an active participant in co-creating their destiny within the framework of God's will. Despite this crucial philosophical disagreement, the underlying congruity remains. Both Nietzsche's cyclical model and the Islamic linear model function as powerful ethical motivators. They are both designed to shatter complacency and force the individual to live with a profound sense of purpose. Whether facing the eternal repetition of the moment or the eternal consequences of it, the individual is called to a state of heightened consciousness, to live in such a way that they can affirm their life in the face of forever. The nature of knowledge and direct experience. A further area of profound convergence between Nietzsche and Islamic mysticism is found in their shared critique of purely abstract knowledge and their corresponding elevation of direct personal experience as the highest form of knowing. Both traditions express a deep-seated skepticism toward forms of knowledge that remain detached from the lived reality of the individual, arguing that true wisdom is not something that is merely acquired intellectually, but something that must be embodied and experienced directly. They both point toward a mode of understanding that transcends the limits of rational thought and transforms the very being of the knower. Nietzsche was one of modern philosophy's most trenchant critics of the ideal of objective, disinterested knowledge. He argued that the notion of a pure intellect observing the world from a neutral, godlike vantage point was a fiction. In his view, all knowledge is perspectival. It is always an interpretation of the world from a particular point of view, shaped by the individual's history, instincts, and underlying drives, which he collectively termed the will to power. For Nietzsche, knowledge was not a passive reflection of reality, but an active engagement with it. He saw the detached systematic philosophies of his time as symptoms of a weak and life-denying will, an attempt to freeze the vibrant, chaotic flux of existence into dead, manageable concepts. In contrast, he championed a form of wisdom that was rooted in lived experience, intuition, and the intelligence of the body, a knowledge that served life rather than attempting to judge it from a place of false superiority. This emphasis on direct experiential knowing finds a powerful parallel in the epistemology of Islamic mysticism or Sufism. The Sufi tradition explicitly categorizes knowledge into different levels of certainty. The first is knowledge of certainty, which is based on logic, reason, and reliable testimony. For example, knowing about fire because someone has told you about it or you have read about it in a book. The next level is the eye of certainty, which comes from direct observation, seeing the fire with your own eyes. But the highest and most valued level is the truth of certainty, which is the knowledge that comes from direct, unmediated personal experience, being burned by the fire. Sufis refer to this level of knowing as tasting, indicating that it is a form of perception that involves the whole person and cannot be adequately conveyed through words. The great Islamic scholar and mystic Al-Ghazali famously underwent a profound intellectual and spiritual crisis. Having mastered all the rational sciences of his time, including philosophy and theology, he found that intellectual proofs alone could not provide him with the absolute certainty his soul craved. He concluded that true certainty about spiritual realities could only be attained through the direct tasting offered by the Sufi path, a path of spiritual discipline and purification that led to direct experiential knowledge of God. The congruence here is striking. Both Nietzsche and the Sufis recognized the limitations of a purely cerebral approach to understanding life's deepest questions. For both, true knowledge is transformative. It is not about accumulating facts, but about undergoing a change in one's state of being. The person who has tasted a spiritual truth is fundamentally different from the person who has merely reasoned about it. In the same way, for Nietzsche, the philosopher's task was not just to think, but to live in a way that embodied their insights, to turn their own life into a testament to their philosophy. Both traditions, therefore, point toward a path where knowing and being become one, where wisdom is not a collection of ideas, but the very texture of one's existence, the body as a source of wisdom. This shared preference for lived experience over abstract theory naturally extends to a deep respect for the human body as an essential source of wisdom and intelligence. In this regard, both Nietzsche and many currents within Islamic thought stand in opposition to dualistic philosophies that view the body as a mere prison for the soul or an obstacle to spiritual progress. Instead, they see the physical form as an integral and indispensable aspect of human existence, a vehicle for knowledge and a crucial partner in the journey towards self-realization. Nietzsche was revolutionary in his insistence that philosophers pay attention to the body. He famously declared that the body is a great reason, a vast and subtle intelligence, while the conscious mind, the I that we so often identify with, is merely a little reason, a small tool of this greater bodily intelligence. He saw our instincts, drives, and even our physical health as profound sources of philosophical insight. He argued that many of the life-denying philosophies of the past were not the product of pure reason, but were, in fact, symptoms of unhealthy, decadent bodies. A philosophy that preaches contempt for the earth and the senses, he reasoned, could only come from someone who was ill at ease in their own skin. For Nietzsche, reclaiming the wisdom of the body was a critical step in overcoming the legacy of Western metaphysics and its hostility to life. A healthy spirit, in his view, required a vibrant and affirmed physicality. The path to the Superman was not one of escaping the body, but of achieving a perfect harmony with it, allowing its powerful instinctual wisdom to guide one's life. While Islamic thought maintains a clear theological distinction between the mortal body and the eternal soul, it does not, in its mainstream expression, devalue or denigrate the physical form. On the contrary, the body is seen as a profound gift and a trust from God. It is the vessel through which the soul experiences the world and the instrument through which it performs acts of worship. Islamic practice is deeply and intentionally embodied. The 5 daily prayers, for example, are not merely a mental exercise, but involve a precise sequence of physical postures, standing, bowing, prostrating, that physically enact the spiritual attitude of submission and humility before the divine. The act of prostration, placing one's forehead on the ground, is a powerful physical symbol of the ego's surrender. Similarly, the annual fast of Ramadan is a deeply physical discipline, using hunger and thirst to cultivate self-control, empathy for the poor, and a heightened state of spiritual awareness. Furthermore, Islamic mystical literature often speaks of the heart not simply as a physical pump, but as a subtle organ of spiritual perception, the true center of consciousness and intelligence. This spiritual heart is understood to be the locus where divine knowledge is received. This concept provides a bridge that complicates any simple mind-body dualism, suggesting an integrated human organism where the physical and spiritual are inextricably linked. Therefore, while coming from very different starting points, one from a post-theological vitalism and the other from a God-centered cosmology, Both Nietzsche and Islamic tradition arrive at a similar conclusion. The body is not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be understood and integrated. For both, true wisdom requires listening to the full chorus of human experience, in which the voice of the body is an essential and irreplaceable part. Aesthetics, beauty, and the path to truth. In both Nietzsche's philosophy and the Islamic spiritual tradition, beauty and art are granted an exceptionally high status, functioning not merely as forms of decoration or entertainment, but as profound pathways to truth and spiritual insight. They are seen as essential cognitive tools, providing a means of perceiving and engaging with reality that transcends the limitations of discursive language and rational analysis. For both, aesthetic experience is a fundamental way of making sense of the world and of affirming one's place within it. Nietzsche famously declared, "We have art in order not to die from the truth." By the truth, he meant the terrifying, chaotic, and often painful nature of existence, which he called the Dionysian. The Dionysian represents the primal, undifferentiated unity of life, a force of ecstatic and destructive energy that dissolves all individual boundaries. To face this truth directly, he argued, would be overwhelming and unbearable. This is where art in its Apollonian aspect comes in. The Apollonian impulse is the drive toward form, order, beauty, and illusion, like the world of a beautiful dream. For Nietzsche, the greatest achievement of human culture, exemplified by ancient Greek tragedy, was the ability to harness the beautiful Apollonian illusion to give form to the terrifying Dionysian truth. Art, in this view, does not hide the truth, but makes it bearable. It transforms the suffering and chaos of life into something beautiful and meaningful, thereby allowing us to affirm existence in its totality, with both its horror and its splendor. Art becomes the ultimate life-affirming activity, a testament to the creative power of the human spirit to find meaning and beauty even in a meaningless universe. Islamic civilization has similarly placed beauty at the center of its spiritual expression, rooted in the prophetic tradition that God is beautiful and loves beauty. The pursuit of beauty in art and architecture became a form of worship, a way of reflecting the divine attributes in the material world. Due to theological reservations about the depiction of living beings, particularly God and the prophets, Islamic art developed a unique and sophisticated non-figural vocabulary. This led to the flourishing of three major art forms: calligraphy, the art of writing the sacred text of the Quran, is considered one of the highest arts, transforming the divine word into a visual object of sublime beauty and contemplation. The intricate geometric patterns, or arabesques, that adorn mosques, manuscripts, and textiles are not mere decoration. They are visual representations of the underlying unity, order, and infinite nature of God's creation, inviting the viewer into a meditative state that transcends the mundane world. Finally, the use of floral patterns and designs evokes the image of the garden, a Quranic symbol for paradise and a reminder of the life-giving beauty of the natural world as a sign of its creator. In both of these traditions, beauty serves a profound epistemological function. It provides a way of knowing and experiencing truths that are inaccessible to the rational mind alone. For Nietzsche, art provides insight into the fundamental tragic and joyful nature of existence. For the Muslim artist and mystic, the experience of beauty is a direct tasting of a divine attribute, a form of remembrance that awakens the heart to the presence of God in the world. For mystics like the poet Rumi, poetry, music, and the ecstatic dance of the Sama ceremony were not just artistic expressions, they were powerful technologies for achieving spiritual union and annihilating the ego in the overwhelming beauty of the divine. Thus, in two vastly different worlds, art and beauty are understood not as a flight from reality, but as one of the most direct and profound encounters with it. Individual excellence and universal compassion. The culmination of both Nietzsche's philosophy and Islamic mystical thought is the vision of a perfected human being, an individual who has transcended ordinary limitations and realized the highest possibilities of human existence. Here we find one of the most fascinating points of convergence and divergence, the relationship between this supreme individual and the rest of humanity. While Nietzsche's Superman and the Islamic perfect human both represent the peak of self-overcoming, they appear to embody different ultimate purposes, one of radical self-creation and the other of compassionate service, that upon closer inspection reveal a shared function of elevating the human condition. Nietzsche's concept of the Superman, or Übermensch, is frequently misunderstood as a call for a ruthless, dominating tyrant. However, its meaning is primarily spiritual and psychological. The Superman is the individual who has fully overcome what Nietzsche called slave morality, the reactive value system of resentment, guilt, and pity, and has moved beyond good and evil. This does not mean they are immoral, but that they no longer rely on inherited moral codes. Instead, they create their own values out of an overflowing sense of strength, creativity, and life affirmation. The Superman's relationship with the rest of humanity is not one of pity, which Nietzsche saw as a debilitating emotion that perpetuates weakness. Rather, their service to humanity is more profound. By their very existence, they demonstrate what humanity can become. They are a gift-giving virtue, whose strength and creativity naturally overflow and enrich the world, forging new paths and establishing new ideals for others to strive toward. Their purpose is not to help the weak in a conventional sense, but to pull all of humanity upward by providing a new, higher goal for human existence. The Islamic concept of the perfect human, or al-insan al-kamil, as articulated by mystics like Ibn Arabi, also represents the pinnacle of human development, but it is framed within a theological context. The perfect human is the individual who has fully actualized all the divine names and attributes within themselves through a process of spiritual purification and annihilation of the ego. They become a polished mirror, perfectly reflecting the divine reality, serving as a bridge or isthmus between God and the created world. Crucially, the journey does not end in this state of sublime union. The final and most complete stage of the path is the return to creation. Having been emptied of their own ego, the perfect human returns to the world, now acting as a pure vessel for divine compassion, wisdom, and guidance. Their interactions with others are no longer dictated by personal desire, but by a profound love born from the realization of the unity of all being. The primary exemplars of this ideal are the prophets, particularly the Prophet Muhammad, who, according to Islamic belief, attained the highest state of proximity to God and then dedicated his entire life to the compassionate guidance and service of his community. At first glance, these two ideals seem opposed, one founded on the assertion of the individual will in a godless universe, the other on the annihilation of the will in submission to God. Yet they share a fundamental structure. Both paths begin with a radical process of self-overcoming and a break from conventional consciousness. Both result in an individual of immense spiritual and psychological power. And most importantly, in both models, the ultimate expression of this perfected state is not a retreat into isolated bliss, but an engagement with the world that has a transformative effect. The Superman gives the gift of new values. The perfect human gives the gift of divine compassion. One acts from a place of supreme strength, the other from a place of supreme emptiness that has become filled with the divine. In their own distinct ways, both Nietzsche and the Islamic mystics envisioned a form of human excellence that by reaching its peak inevitably overflows for the benefit of all.